This time here in Goss's Garage, we're going to talk about a concern for those of you who own older vehicles. Now, older, I mean pre-1975. The cars that were built when lead was still in gasoline. Now, the question that I get all the time is, do I have to run a lead additive or something like that in my older car that was designed for fuel with lead? Well, maybe not. But first we have to understand what all of this is about. Now, here we have a modern cylinder head. And this is made of aluminum. The old ones were made of cast iron in most cases. And here we see the valve that is going to open and close, being controlled by the camshaft. Now, when this is open, we can have either fuel coming in or exhaust going out, depending which valve it is. And when it's closed, you see the tapered back on this valve. Well, it goes against the tapered seat that is pressed into the head. Now, to see that, here we have a valve seat before it's machined with the taper. This valve seat gets pressed into the head and then it's machined so that it matches the taper on the valve. Now, back in the day, these valve seats were actually part of the cast iron of the cylinder head. Now, some of them were heat treated and so on, but they were still relatively soft. Now, we put lead into the fuel, and the lead did 2 or 3 different things. Number one, it acted as a lubricant for the valve guide. That's the portion that supports the valve as it slides up and down in the head. It was a good lubricant for that. And it raised the octane of the gasoline. Now, octane is nothing more than resistance to pinging. It is not anything to do with more energy or more heat or anything like that. It's just resistance to pinging or knocking. All right, so it raised the octane, and the last thing that it did is it cushioned the valve and helped the valve dissipate heat. Now, if you stop and think about it, these valves are immersed in flame. You got the fuel burning in there, you got tremendous temperatures, the valves get very hot. They come back, they close, they touch the metal of the valve seat for a fraction of a second, and during that fraction of a second, they have to cool off. Well, the lead helped that process. It helped transmit the heat into the cylinder head where it could be dissipated. But the other thing was it cushioned the blow. Now, suppose right here with this anvil on this vise, this is steel. Now, suppose we didn't have any lead in one of these older engines. Now, let's hit this and see what it's a sharp knock. Well, we take the lead out of gasoline, that's the way the valve hits the valve seat. Now here, we've got a piece of lead. You can hear the difference noticeably. It cushioned the closing of the valves. Well, we take that cushioning away, and what might happen, each time that this valve closes, there's this minuscule, it's microscopic little piece of metal that gets knocked off of the valve seat. Over time, hundreds of miles, thousands of miles, hundreds of thousands of miles, the valve seat wears away. Well, as it does, this valve can move farther up into the seat because the seat is getting wider. Now, up here in the rocker arms and so on, between the camshaft and everything, there are clearances. So as this valve recedes into the valve seat, these clearances go away. Then what happens is there's not enough clearance to allow the valve to close completely, and as the piston is moving up and those flames and so on, there's a little bit of leakage. It's like if you were trying to start a fire and you get a little ember going there and you blow on it, you get this tremendous amount of heat and the fire takes off. Well, the same thing here. As this flame front is being pushed past the valve. It becomes superheated, and before you know it, there is a nick that is worn or burned into the valve, and you have a burned valve, and you need a valve job. All right, so now the things that affect this: how hard the engine is used, like in a truck or something like that where it's hauling heavy loads all the time. That's going to make all of this happen more rapidly. Going to the racetrack is going to make it happen more rapidly. Taking a long trip, say you're going from New York to Miami and you're going to get on 95 and you're going to be cruising for hours on end. Well, that would increase this erosion and the chance of a burned valve. But let's face it, most of these older collectible cars never get used like that. They get used in parades, they get driven to car shows and things like that, but they don't get driven really hard. Now, if you do use yours hard, I would recommend that you do use some kind of an additive in the fuel. All right. Now, the other thing is that if you don't use it hard, should you spend money removing the cylinder heads, having new hardened valve seats put into the heads and so on? Well, no. And the reason it's no is because you don't know whether this is ever going to happen, or if it does happen, when it will happen. So what you do is you drive the car normally without additives or anything like that, and you wait for something to happen. Well, when and if it happens, and it may never, then what you do is you have the heads removed, you do a valve job, and you have hardened valve seats installed. This is probably going to be done with other things that the engine will need by that time, so the cost is going to be a lot less, and you're going to get more bang for your buck. But keep in mind that unless you use it hard, it may never happen. And the other thing to keep in mind is that all of the additives and things like that that people put into it, over several years, all of those additives and everything, well, they'll cost enough that it would almost pay for the valve job and the hardened seats on some engines. So that, in my opinion, is the better way to go. And if you have a question or comment, how about dropping me a line right here at radio@goss-garage.com.